name is Ortigoza, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on my visitation to the California Indian Museum. And just a disclaimer, a lot of these photos I grabbed from the internet because prior to going into the Indian State Museum, I didn't know that I wasn't allowed to take pictures. So some of the pictures that I show today are pictures I found online that are of the museum, or pictures I found online that relate to items in the museum. So to start, I'm gonna go in order of which exhibit I saw first in the museum, and then go from there. So the first thing I saw was the dentalium strings. So these strings right here are of monetary value to people of the northwestern California. So these shells were tied in strings and had high, very high value. These shells right here are not local. They originate around Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and were brought and traded to these people. So one shell, just one of these tiny shells, would buy you a whole basket cup full of tobacco. And to give you a sense of how big that was, it's about like a mug, like a regular sized mug. One string of these would buy you 65 feet of necklace in time, which is a different type of shell. And it would be decorated more like this second photo down here. It'd be decorated and people would actually wear it. These strings here wouldn't be worn, they would be saved in some type of bag, like any money would. And then two strings would buy you an otter hide quiver, which is a bow holder, with a bow and 40 arrows. Or two strings could also buy you a very large bow, like seen here, this boat right here. Three strings would buy you a whole house, and I could show you later on in the presentation what kind of house that would buy. It's a pretty decent sized house that would fit a pretty decent sized family. Um, Eight strings would buy you a large ceremonial blade, and 10 strings would buy you a white deerskin that was ceremonially decorated. And I saw this deerskin in the museum, and I don't have a picture of it because I couldn't find one. And unfortunately, I couldn't take a picture of it, just as out of respect of the museum. But the deerskin was very beautiful. It was decorated with woodpecker feathers and shells and all different types of bird feathers. Very beautiful. So, like I mentioned earlier, this boat would be bought for only two of those strings, and those strings weren't very long, so you could see how much value those shells had to these northwestern native peoples. Um, so I couldn't find the exact measurement around the exhibit of how big this boat was, but in my mind, I measured the boat in my head, seeing how many times I could lay in it straight. And I'm about 5'4", and I could lay about four of me in there. So I came to the conclusion that it was about or even over 20 feet long and about 3 feet wide. It could fit about like 15 people in there, which is pretty big for this size of wood. I just imagine how much wood it would take to actually make this boat. And these boats were actually primarily made by the Yurok people and sold to the Hupa and the Karuk people. These groups considered these boats the most important possession their family could own. So that just goes to show how much value these boats and those dentalium shells have, because not even the house to them was more important than their boats, as this is their means of transportation through rivers and to the coast. So next we have is some regalia for the jump dance, and these are some native people, an anthropological photo of people ready to perform the jump dance. So the jump dance is a ceremonial dance held in late summer, early fall. It's performed as one of the ceremonies dedicated to renewing the world. So the dance would last up to 10 days, and the purpose of the dance was to make the world right by warding off misfortune and disease from the people. The dance was only performed by men. Um, right here, you can see that women still dressed for the occasion since it was very ceremonial, but only men would perform the actual dance. And then um, the headpiece that the man is wearing, you could see the white deerskin and red woodpecker crests, which is something that was close to what the deerskin would look like. And that deerskin costs about 10 strings, which is more value than the bow. So for the dance, the dancers erect a tall wooden cedar plank right in the middle of the ceremonial dance house and dance right in front of the plank. And the area behind the plank is held in reserve for ancestors who come join the performance. So no one would be dancing around the plank, everyone would be just right in front of it. And then behind that would the dance would happen. And the dance is very complicated. I tried to look up a video to see if I can find one. I couldn't find one, but simply it's just a very ceremonial, very rich dance. Um, the dance is said to be taught to the people by the immortals who lived in a sacred time before and during the people. And then this is a Yurok home that I found a picture online of, and this is what three of those dentalium shell strings could buy you. That just goes to show how much value those strings had. So next, I'm going to show you guys some photos of the actual museum. So this photograph is taken of the museum and it's of other photographs. So these photographs are of family of both past and present. They are lent to the museum by existing native families from around California and also from anthropologists from their studies. So closely here you can see a married couple and then there's an elder wearing a ceremonial headdress. Um, a lot of these pictures are just of the dances and of the regalia that I showed you guys, and also of families. As you can see, this one's uh, of family. Next, these are some regalia, which is basically just mean clothes, of the flower dance, and the flower dance is performed by men and women. And then so I showed here a traditional dress for a woman and a traditional skirt for a woman as well. Next, I want to talk about the baskets. So, the baskets were one of the most important aspects of the museum just because it's one of the most highly attainable artifacts of native people of California. So, a lot of these baskets shown in the image to the left are made by the Miwok people, which is actually native people from my area in Elk Grove. And this basket on the right here is by us Luiseno indigenous person. The basket here you can see is very intricately detailed. It's so you could see from here it's the start of the tail of a snake, and it would wrap around the whole basket, and then this I'm guessing is a turtle. These this is closely resembles some of the baskets that I saw in the museum. They were very well detailed and very beautiful. This is this here is another image of just the a separate display of baskets. Here you can see some of the baskets. This is an image of the museum, an image that I did not take. So baskets to the Miwok people are very, very important. So important to the fact that they would describe them as part of the family, like a child. So close that a, a basket has a meaning to an indigenous person that a non basket weaving person, which is generally a non native, would know. They wouldn't know the importance of how much these handmade baskets mean to the family. Like it's something, it's like an heirloom. And so, for centuries, California Indians have produced a vast array of cultural materials, including these baskets, and within very tribe with tribal variation within the function and style of these baskets. Uh, Prior to 1900, a separate category entitled art didn't exist for this type of basketry art. Cultural materials like these in the museum were just woven into the daily lives of these natives. Being said, the items shown in this picture exemplify traditional and modern blends of methods and materials used by Native Americans. And interestingly enough, I read in one of the museum exhibits that the civil rights movement of the 1960s, yes, the civil rights movement of black rights, wasn't just for black rights, it brought increased interest in native made items, but also a heightened sense of purpose and pride in being Indian. Tradition is something, is ancestral knowledge that native artists now draw on to guide creative development. Native people are now embracing their inner cultural ingenuity, expressing creativity using contemporary mediums, painting, sculptures, literature, photography, and pottery, like shown in this picture. This is an example of some of the pottery and some of the water holders that were made. And this is an image of some of the stuff that, some of the art that is sold in the museum made by actual native people, which is which was really exciting to see. A lot of these items could be sold online on sites such as like Etsy and are often not made by native people. So when I saw these and the employee at the museum told me that they're all native made, it was pretty cool. So this last slide here, but this sign in the museum resonated heavily with what the perspective and the point of views that we learned in this class is the native perspective, the not allowing the post-colonial um, timeline to dictate and to describe what native life is. This image here, this poster here that you can pause the video to read if you would like, describes the horrific and just the traumatic experience that natives went through the California mission. That the missions were intently for religious and good purpose, but for natives that didn't actually happen. It describes the California missions as something so traumatic for them. And it's so ironic for this to be shown because the museum isn't on property of a mission, but is actually right next to, like 20 feet away from Sutter's Fort. And Sutter's Fort is another place where natives endured such horrific treatment as slaves and workers. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the Native American Grave Protection and Reparation Act of 1990. So this is another exhibit in the museum, which wasn't really an exhibit, more like just a informative kind of text, just like the image next to it. So the act required federal institutions that received federal funding to return Native American culture items to its respective lineal descents and culturally affiliated Indian tribes. Because during the 1880s and 90s, collecting archaeological collecting was done by untrained adventurers. And so by 1990, over 14,000 native deceased remains were in the possession of the federal government. So this act helped return a lot of those artifacts and deceased remains to their respective owners. To conclude my presentation, I would just like to say some final words about the museum itself. It was really a great wonder to go through the museum just because it put me in the place of native life. I felt like it was describing a way of life that wasn't completely gone, that was still here, that's still present in California. These cultural items weren't just old artifacts that had just been dug up or found. Their items were donated and lent to the museum by people who still use them, people who still make them. So the approach of this museum is very anthropological, very native, very in the now.